The studio lights rise slowly, bright but distant. They offer no warmth, only clarity. This kind of light has one purpose, to reveal everything that tries to hide. In the very center of the polished stage floor, two chairs face one another with careful, deliberate symmetry. Nothing is accidental here. Not the spacing, not the angle, not the silence. Alan Dershowitz settles into his chair with the composure of someone accustomed to being observed, evaluated, and ultimately agreed with. He adjusts his glasses with a small practice motion, the kind that comes from decades of televised debate. His expression is calm, almost serene, the quiet confidence of a man who has rarely been challenged without first having the advantage. His entire posture says the next hour belongs to him. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sits with stillness that isn't passive but quietly commanding. No note cards, no urgent breaths, no performative anticipation. Her hands rest lightly against the table, unbothered. Her gaze is steady, not sharp yet, more like a horizon waiting for the sun to rise. She doesn't appear to be preparing for argument. She looks like someone who has already seen how everything will unfold. The moderator introduces them with neutral courtesy. A polite ripple of applause appears, then dissolves, leaving something heavier behind. The audience doesn't need time to choose sides. The room has already done that on instinct. Dershowitz leans in first. His voice carries the polished cadence of lectures and courts, an academic gravity designed to occupy space. It is smooth, self-assured, calibrated to guide attention rather than earn it. He speaks like a man who expects comprehension to follow his direction by default. Yet Crockett does not respond. She doesn't nod, doesn't purse her lips, doesn't affirm or challenge. She simply listens, letting silence sit beside her like an ally. Her eyes move the way a clock hand moves, steady, inevitable, counting down something unseen, and slowly, without any obvious signal, that silence becomes heavier than his words. To most viewers, she still appears quiet, maybe contemplative, but quiet can be mistaken for caution when it is actually control. The still lake always has a deep floor. Dershowitz finishes his opening with a small glance toward the cameras, the look of someone satisfied with the energy he has established. He is sure he has set the rhythm. Crockett merely blinks. It's not reaction, it's measurement. And somewhere between that blink and the breath that follows, the axis of power shifts, so subtly that only a few in the audience sense it. The narrator enters like a whisper threading through thought. He arrived prepared with citations, arguments, and legacy. She came with one question he cannot escape. For a moment, the future leans into the present, a flicker of inevitability, a warning hidden in the quiet. If this is your defense, then what exactly are you defending? Then the moment fades. The opening proceeds how everyone expected. Dershowitz speaks with ease, voice steady with the practice of years. His arguments unfold with elegance. References, historical parallels, appeals to tradition. His presence attempts to occupy every angle of the room. He is not merely speaking. He is shaping atmosphere. The moderator listens. The audience watches. Cameras catch every small shift, and throughout it all, Jasmine Crockett remains still, unshaken, watching, measuring, waiting. Her stillness begins to resemble strategy, not silence. Dershowitz misreads it. He grows more animated, not just explaining his perspective, but attempting to explain hers to her, as though his interpretation carries authority over her identity. He widens his claim, his voice smoothing into something paternal, guiding, directive. He believes he is directing the debate. He is actually constructing the walls of his own arguments. Limits Crockett's first movement is a single, not slow, deliberate, barely, more than a breath of motion. It rattles him. Not dramatically, not visibly to most, but enough. He recovers, yes, but recovery is not the same as control. He says her name repeatedly. Miss Crockett, Congresswoman, each repetition meant to hold ground, to assert framing. He does not realize that repetition erodes authority rather than builds it, and she lets him continue. He grows louder, passionate, enthused by his own structure. Each layer he adds is less about truth and more about reinforcing himself. Her eyes narrow, not in aggression, but in recognition. She has seen this pattern before. Ego dressed as principle. When he finishes, the silence that follows is not empty. It is deliberate, weighted, a silence that demands awareness. He leans back. Content, Certain, Crockett speaks. Her tone is steady. Even. A voice that does not need to reach to be heard. Professor Dershowitz, she begins, voice quiet enough that everyone must lean in. You've constructed quite an argument. He smiles, believing she means praise, but tell me. Her voice remains calm, almost gentle. Is that your argument or your defense? The room pauses. The question sounds simple, but beneath it something sharp glints. He laughs lightly, searching refuge in charm. He tries to redirect. Principles, constitutional considerations, broader frameworks. She interrupts softly. Not to dominate, but to refine. No, I understand the principle. I'm asking why the principle appears to matter only when it protects power. A ripple moves through the audience, not noise. Awareness, Dershowitz continues, but something in his tone has shifted. He is responding now, not establishing, chasing justification instead of holding it. And Crockett? She still hasn't raised her voice. She just waits, allowing silence to sculpt truth. The moderator finally turns toward her. Congresswoman, would you like to respond? She does not move. She simply looks at Dershowitz. And then, I will, she answers. When he stops answering questions I haven't asked. The room reacts. Soft exhale, shock, quiet admiration. Dershowitz adjusts his papers. His smile tightens. He begins again, but defense has replaced confidence. Volume has replaced certainty. Crockett's calm has not changed at all. She leans forward, voice steady. I want to understand something. When you speak of justice bending for influence, are you describing fairness, or are you redefining it? The question lands softly, but its weight is undeniable. He begins to answer, but the words stumble. His certainty falters. The pause that follows is fragile, suspended in the air like held breath. Power does not shift with force. It shifts when silence becomes the stronger voice. Crockett leans back once more, allowing him to continue, knowing the unraveling no longer needs her help. And somewhere inside that unfolding moment, the audience understands. The debate has already ended. The crowd shifts, small ripples of reaction moving through the room. Dershowitz hears it. He tightens his posture, straightens his tie, and leans in again, trying to reassert dominance. He interrupts the moderator before the next question can be asked. He pivots the topic, redefining terms, reciting precedent after precedent. It's impressive, at least on the surface, but it's also frantic. Crockett waits again, allowing the silence after his last sentence to stretch just a little longer than comfort allows. When she answers, her voice is soft, patient, the kind of tone people use when they already know they've won. You've mentioned precedent 4 times, she says, but not once have you mentioned accountability. He frowns slightly. Accountability is implied in the law itself. She tilts her head again. Then why does it disappear when power is involved? The question lands heavier than anything before it. He opens his mouth, but the sentence never fully forms. His eyes shift down to his notes as if the answer might be hiding between the lines. She doesn't press. She lets the silence work for her again. This time it's not just quiet, its recognition. Everyone in the room feels it. The narrator's voice slips in, steady and observant. He interrupted her 5 times, each one shorter than the last. Because interruption only works when confidence still exists. Dershowitz clears his throat. You're misinterpreting my point, Congresswoman. I'm not defending power. I'm defending process. Process? She repeats softly. That's an interesting word for protection. He starts to respond, but something in her tone stops him. It isn't loud or confrontational. It's surgical, a kind of calm that can't be debated, only endured. And then she leans in just slightly, her voice still steady. You've spent your career explaining the law to people who've already broken it. But tonight I'm asking you something different. When the system protects the powerful, who defends the people it leaves behind? The room stills again. It's not an attack. It's a demand for honesty. Dershowitz takes a deep breath. That's not a fair framing. Neither is injustice, she replies. He opens his mouth again, but this time there's nothing left to say. The moderator looks between them, unsure whether to intervene or let the silence speak for itself. He chooses silence, and in that stillness something undeniable becomes clear. The crowd isn't watching a debate anymore. They're watching a transformation. The once commanding professor now sits smaller in his chair. The Congresswoman, still calm, has become the gravity in the room. Dershowitz shifts in his seat, forcing a polite smile. But the performance is fading. He's not steering anymore, and he's stalling. Crockett senses it. Her gaze doesn't waver. Her words come softer now, almost gentle. "You don't have to raise your voice to make your point," she says. He looks up slightly startled by the softness of it. "Sometimes," she continues, "clarity does more damage than volume ever could." He nods, pretending to agree, but he knows the damage is already done. The narrator's voice returns, closing the moment with quiet certainty. He came to prove her wrong. Instead, he proved her right. And the more he spoke, the clearer her silence became. The camera lingers on their faces, one steady, one unsettled. The audience feels the pattern forming. The repetition, the rising voice, the quiet replies, the balance of power slowly tilting toward truth. And somewhere beneath the lights and applause, Alan Dershowitz finally realizes he isn't debating anymore. He's being studied. Control is a fragile thing. It doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes and whispers. By the time the moderator asks the next question, the rhythm of the room has already changed. Dershowitz hears the words, but he's answering a different question, one that only exists in his own defense. His sentences loop back on themselves, building fences around arguments that no longer stand. Crockett listens, still unmoving. Every time he tries to reclaim the stage, her silence waits for him like a mirror, and the longer he speaks, the smaller his voice sounds against it. He begins another elaborate point, something about constitutional consistency, precedent, tradition. But halfway through, his words begin to tremble under their own weight. The audience leans forward, sensing the tremor, even if they can't name it. Crockett tilts her head, eyes fixed on him. And when she finally speaks, it feels less like interruption and more like intervention. "Professor," she says quietly, "I'm not questioning your memory. I'm questioning your motive." The phrase lands like a drop of ink in water, slow, spreading, impossible to contain. He blinks, caught off guard. "My motive?" He repeats, laughing softly as though amusement can disguise discomfort. "My only motive is truth." She nods once. "Then you should have no problem answering directly." Her tone is even polite, but the edge is unmistakable. He clears his throat. "Of course, what's the question?" She leans forward slightly. "When truth becomes inconvenient for power, do you defend the truth or the power?" The silence that follows isn't empty. It's loaded, electric, waiting. Dershowitz blinks again, then smiles the way people do when they need a second to think. "Well, Congresswoman, it's not that simple. The law requires nuance." She doesn't raise her voice. "Nuance isn't the same as evasion, Ellen," the audience reacts. The air itself feels heavier. He starts to respond, but she keeps speaking, measured, deliberate. "You've built a career out of defending systems that bend for the powerful. I just want to understand whether you think justice should bend with them." He shifts in his seat. The smile fades. "That's not a fair characterization," he says quickly. "Then make it fair," she replies. The exchange hangs in the air, perfectly balanced between intellect and impact. He takes a deep breath, leans back, and begins again, slower this time. He talks about history, context, moral complexity. Every phrase sounds carefully chosen, but also carefully afraid. Crockett watches, never interrupting, never blinking, waiting for the space between his words, the place where truth usually hides. When he finishes, she simply says, "So, if the law protects wrongdoing under the cover of legitimacy, do you still call it justice?" The room freezes. It's not a rhetorical question. It's a blade. He hesitates. The pause stretches long enough for the audience to feel it burn. He looks at the moderator, then back at her. "I think that's an unfair hypothetical." Crockett nods slowly. "Unfair to whom?" The whisper of reaction turns into murmurs. Everyone feels the balance tip. Dershowitz straightens his papers, as eye order on the desk could restore order in the room. He tries again, but now every sentence sounds defensive. Each word carries the sound of a man retreating behind the walls of language. Crockett lets him finish, then delivers the line that finally breaks the rhythm completely. "You talk about defending law," she says, "but sometimes law is just power written in ink. What happens when the ink runs out?" He opens his mouth, but nothing comes. The audience exhales, a sound between awe and disbelief. For a few seconds, no one moves. Even the moderator hesitates to speak, caught between duty and disbelief. The narrator's voice slides softly into the silence. That was the moment it changed. The scholar became the subject. The defense became the confession. Dershowitz clears his throat again, but now the sound betrays nerves. He laughs under his breath, searching for charm. "You're a tough interviewer, Congresswoman." Crockett shakes her head. "No, I'm just not impressed by practiced certainty." The crowd reacts again, louder this time. The applause is brief, but it lands like punctuation. He tries to speak over it, but the words blur together, losing their sharpness. Every syllable feels like a step backward, and then for the first time he stops mid-sentence, realizing she isn't going to interrupt him. She doesn't need to because now the silence belongs to her. The narrator returns calm and clear. Power thinks it ends the conversation by speaking last, but sometimes the conversation ends because someone else has already said everything that needed to be heard. Crockett leans back, folding her hands gently, eyes steady on the man across from her. She doesn't look triumphant. She looks resolved. Her calm isn't victory, it's verification. Across the table, Dershowitz finally looks down. He adjusts his notes, but there's nothing left to adjust. The shape of the debate has changed, and so has he. The moment lingers, long, deliberate, unspoken, then the lights seem to dim around them, not literally but perceptibly. It's what happens when a truth too heavy to ignore settles into the air. The narrator's final line for the segment lands like quiet thunder. The shift didn't come with noise. It came with a question that couldn't be escaped. Fate on Crockett's face, calm, unshaken, patient. The turning point has arrived. There's a strange stillness in the room, the kind that only comes after truth brushes too close for comfort. The applause fades. The lights seem harsher now, less flattering. Alan Dershowitz clears his throat again, but it sounds different this time, uncertain. He looks toward the moderator as if waiting for rescue. None comes. This is no longer a debate. It's an autopsy, and the body on the table is his own argument. Crockett hasn't moved. Her hands remain folded. Her breathing is steady. Every inch of her composure is deliberate, the kind of calm that unnerves people used to commanding the floor. When she finally speaks, her tone is low even, but it cuts through there like glass. You've spent decades defending powerful men, she says, and every time you say the same thing, that everyone deserves a defense. He nods quickly, seizing the chance to recover. Of course, that's the cornerstone of justice. She tilts her head. Justice, that word you use like a shield. Heb blinks, excuse me. She leans forward slightly. Tell me something, Professor. When the system protects the powerful from accountability and punishes the powerless for surviving, is that still justice? The question hangs suspended. The audience stops breathing. Even the hum of the studio equipment feels like it's listening. Dershowitz opens his mouth, then closes it. He looks down at his notes, searching for something that isn't there. Finally, he starts. Well, that's a political framing. Justice doesn't discriminate. Crockett interrupts, her voice soft but surgical. No, justice doesn't discriminate. But people do, and people write the laws. So whose justice are we actually defending? The silence returns heavier this time. It's the silence that follows realization. The silence that reveals what words tried to hide. Hell-offs. Not from humor, but from nerves. Congresswoman, I've spent my life upholding the law. Crockett nods slowly. Yes, you have. But have you ever asked yourself who the law was written to uphold? The moderator glances between them, uncertain whether to intervene, but no one moves. No one dares break the moment. Dershowitz exhales a little too loudly. This is turning into philosophy. Philosophy, she replies, is what people call it when truth gets uncomfortable. He shifts again, adjusts his tie. His confidence, once solid, now brittle. He tries to laugh it off. You're very clever, Congresswoman. Crockett shakes her head gently. Cleverness is for people trying to win arguments. I'm just asking questions. Her voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. The weight is in the calm. And in that calm, she presses further. You once said that defending the guilty was essential to preserving the rights of the innocent. Yes, he says immediately, grateful for familiar ground. Exactly. That's the essence of fairness. She pauses, lets him breathe for a second, then asks, So, when the guilty are powerful and the innocent are forgotten, who exactly are you preserving? The line hits like thunder with no lightning, just impact. He doesn't speak. He blinks once, twice. His lips part, but there's no sound. The moderator looks down. The crew holds their breath. Every person in the room feels the moment lock into history. Crockett doesn't push. She lets the silence speak for her. The camera catches it all, the quiet unraveling of certainty. Dershowitz swallows hard. Forcing composure. You're oversimplifying complex realities. She nods. That's what complex realities sound like when truth gets close enough to name them. A ripple moves through the audience. Not applause, not noise, just the sound of people realizing they've witnessed something rare. He tries one last time, his voice softer now. You have to understand, I've always stood on principle. Crockett meets his eyes. Then maybe it's time to ask whether your principles still stand on you. It's not an insult. It's an incision. There's no malice in her tone, just precision. The kind of precision that doesn't seek to humiliate, only to reveal. He sighed a long, tired sound. "You're not trying to debate me." "No," she says. "I'm trying to remind you that defense isn't the same as denial." He looks at her for a long time, something flickering behind his eyes. Maybe frustration, maybe respect. When he finally speaks, his voice is quiet. "You're very good at this." Crockett gives the faintest smile. "I don't need to be good at it. I just need to be honest." That line lands heavier than any argument could. The narrator's voice slides softly over the moment. She didn't shout. She didn't dominate. She didn't need to, because truth once spoken without fear doesn't compete. It concludes. The camera holds on Dershowitz. For once, there's no counterpoint. No clever pivot, no polished defense. Only the reflection of a man who realizes he's standing on ground that no longer supports him. Crockett leans back almost gently, like the storm has already passed. She looks at him not as an opponent, but as evidence, and with the same measured tone she adds, "I don't silence people, Professor. I just give them enough room to hear themselves." He doesn't respond. He can't. The conversation is over, even if the show isn't. The narrator returns, his voice now low, reflective. She didn't win by force. She won by presence. Because in a world of constant noise, calm conviction is louder than any argument. The lights seem warmer now. Not on her, but because of her. The audience begins to applaud, hesitant at first, then steady. Crockett doesn't bask in it. She simply nods once, the kind of gesture that ends something larger than a segment. And as the applause swells, the camera captures her final expression. Composed, serene, quietly certain. Then the narrator closes with the final words that echo beyond the screen. He built his defense in words. She built her question on truth. And in that moment, the truth didn't just speak, it silenced. Some answers don't need to be spoken. They just need to stop running. The silence didn't end when the cameras cut. It lingered in the walls, in the crew's nervous glances, in the way everyone suddenly spoke softer, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Alan Dershowitz remained seated for a few seconds after the show wrapped, his hands resting awkwardly on the table. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The gravity he carried into the studio had shifted, redistributed, absorbed by the quiet confidence across from him. Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply gathered her papers, blank mostly, and stood. As she turned to leave, a producer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than applause. Outside the studio, the air felt different. Lighter for some, heavier for others. The recording had barely finished when the first clip started leaking online. A 10-second snippet, then a minute-long highlight, then the full exchange. By nightfall, her question was everywhere. Every feed, every platform, repeated, remixed, revered. When the system protects the powerful from accountability and punishes the powerless for surviving, is that still justice? People paused when they heard it. Some replayed it 3 times, trying to process the precision, the weight, the calm with which it was delivered. Others argued over it in the comments. Political analysts, lawyers, students, activists, ordinary viewers who'd stumbled onto something that felt more like revelation than rhetoric. But there was one common thread in every discussion. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't humiliated. She had simply asked, and the question refused to die. By morning, headlines appeared. Crockett's question leaves Dershowitz speechless. The moment truth outweighed experience. When calm became a weapon, clips from the interview aired across networks, each one ending the same way. Dershowitz silent, blinking under the weight of a truth he couldn't sidestep. Political commentators tried to spin it. Some called it a brilliant rhetorical trap. Others dismissed it as performative moralism. But for millions watching, it wasn't politics. It was clarity. It was watching certainty crumble under the simplest form of power, a question that needed no answer. Meanwhile, in a small cafe across town, 2 law students sat with laptops open, replaying the moment for the 5th time. She didn't argue with him, one said. The other nodded. She didn't have to. She just changed the question. In living rooms and classrooms, on podcasts and panels, the conversation spread, not about who won, but about why it mattered. The narrator's voice returns, calm but charged. Sometimes the aftermath isn't an explosion. It's an echo spreading further, growing louder after the noise has stopped. By the end of the week, the clip had surpassed 50 million views. Late-night hosts dissected it. Columnists quoted it. Even those who disagreed couldn't ignore it. Because beneath the politics, beneath the talking points, something universal had surfaced. A quiet reminder that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers until the world goes still enough to hear it. Dershowitz appeared days later on another network, trying to explain, to clarify, to regain control of the narrative. But every explanation sounded like justification. Every justification sounded smaller next to the silence she left him in. He called the moment unfair. He said she weaponized morality. But even as he spoke, the audience seemed to sense it, that he was trying to build something already dismantled. Crockett, meanwhile, said nothing. No follow-up interviews, no victory lap, no viral tweet. She didn't need to explain the moment. The moment had explained itself. In one quiet exchange, she'd shifted the rhythm of how people thought about power. Not by overpowering it, but by revealing its fragility. The narrator continues. Power depends on being heard, but real strength is found in being understood. She didn't demand attention. She commanded silence, and silence obeyed. At a university forum the following week, a student asked Dershowitz about the exchange. He smiled tightly and said, "It was a clever question," but his tone carried the weight of defeat because he knew cleverness wasn't what silenced him, conviction was. Back in her office days later, Crockett watched the replay once. Only once. When her aide asked how she felt, she shrugged lightly. It wasn't about him, she said. It was about the question. He had nodded. You think he ever answers it? She smiled faintly. He already did. Outside the window, the city moved as it always did. Loud, distracted, spinning on the axis of argument and opinion. But for those who'd seen the exchange, something subtle had shifted. They began asking their own versions of the question in courtrooms, classrooms, conversations. That's how echoes work. They don't fade, they multiply. The narrator's final monologue fades in over a soft hum. Some debates end in applause, others end in awareness. What she did that night wasn't an argument. It was a recalibration, a reminder that truth doesn't belong to those who speak the loudest, but to those who refuse to let silence be mistaken for surrender. The camera fades back in. Archival shots of the interview playing in slow motion. Crockett's calm eyes, Dershowitz's uncertain smile, then her line subtitled in white against the darkened frame. Whose justice are we actually defending? The music swells, not triumphant but steady, measured, purposeful. The narrator closes, and in a world drowning in noise, she didn't shout to be heard. She asked to be remembered. It began as a moment, just one question, one silence, one unguarded second of truth. But moments have a way of growing when they strike the right nerve. And this one didn't fade. It multiplied. In the days that followed, the clip left the screens and entered the streets. Posters, podcasts, classroom debates, dinner tables, all echoing the same line. When the system protects the powerful and punishes the powerless, is that still justice? It wasn't just a question anymore. It was a mirror held up to everyone who'd ever trusted power without asking who it served. From New York to Nairobi, from courtrooms to college halls, people began quoting it not as an accusation but as a measure, a way of testing their own beliefs. In law schools, professors replayed the exchange as an example of moral reasoning under pressure. In living rooms, families argued over what justice really meant. And in quiet corners of power, a few people who'd built careers on complexity began to fear simplicity. The narrator's voice enters, softer now, reflective. She didn't rewrite the law that night. She just reminded the world that law without conscience is only order, not justice. Alan Dershowitz eventually moved on to other interviews, other arguments, other stages, but no matter where he went, that moment followed him. The question waited in every conversation, silent but present, like a ghost of accountability. And Jasmine Crockett, she never mentioned it again. She didn't have to. Her words had already detached from her voice, living their own life out in the world. Weeks later, a journalist asked her what it felt like to win that exchange. She smiled and said quietly, "I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to wake something up." That was the difference. She hadn't spoken for the cameras or the crowd or even the man across from her. She had spoken for the silence that justice leaves behind when it forgets who it's meant to protect. The narrator closes with a final reflection. Calm, timeless, every era has its argument. Every truth has its test. But once in a while, one question cuts through everything we pretend not to see. And when it does, the world doesn't answer. It listens, and one final caption appears. White text on silence. The question still echoes.